Assistant Town Moderator. I think we saw most everybody's faces yesterday at voting. So Deerfield had a green face this year. Mr. Holt. Pleased to be moderating this year's Deerfield Candidates Night. We have a full slate of town candidates. We'll be doing the school positions afterwards. Before we started, I want to give a big thank you to PTO and to DCS for organizing this important event, which provides us all with an opportunity to learn more about candidates' motivations and positions. All the candidates who filed for town or school district office by January 31 deadline were contacted by the DCS PTO and given the opportunity to participate in this forum. There are a number of people who are not here, but who have filed for positions. All candidates may present themselves at this forum, whether or not they are in a contested race. We have, I think, in my count, we had 6 contested races, but we had a number of races where just one person qualified. Help yourself to a chair. We're getting started. So tonight our process will be as follows. As you can see, we're starting with the town positions first. All candidates vying for any open position on a particular board will be presented in the same grouping while we're presenting all the positions together. Each candidate will be given up to 3 minutes to introduce him or herself and to express to the community why he or she is running for that office. Candidates should please limit your comments on yourself as a candidate. As this is not in a debate format, please do not digress to discussion about another candidate or an unrelated topic. At all times, comments must be respectful of others, present or absent. A 30-second warning will be given at the 2-minute and 30-second mark. At the 3-minute mark, please quickly finish your thoughts, and I will curtail candidates as appropriate for time and for content. Following the introductory speeches, the floor will be open to questions from the community. I would like to if you would like to ask a question of any or all of the candidates, please raise your hand. Move to the microphone as we are recording tonight, so we need to have the sound system capture your question. State your name and address at the microphone and ask your question clearly so that all may hear. Please refrain from introductory commentary as we only have so much time this evening to get through all the candidates and we want them to do most of the talking. After you ask your question, please feel free to sit down. Similar to the candidates, I ask that anybody asking a question, please make them respectful of others at all times. Depending on who you're asking, if you're asking an entire committee, I'll make sure that that particular person knows when to start responding. If you're asking an entire committee, then what I'll do is I will start with one person on the committee and then we'll work our way across the committee. And I'll try to just rotate where we start so that everybody doesn't feel like they're starting first or ending last. Responses should be limited to 2 minutes. And again, at the 30-second mark, a warning will be given. Are there any questions as to how this will proceed? We should be completed no later than 8:30, and I'm guessing perhaps a little earlier. So let's begin. So first, let's start at the far end of the table. Introduce yourself. You have 3 minutes to talk, and indicate what position you're seeking.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Andy Robertson, and I'm running for the Board of Selectmen. For those of you that don't know me, I live on Haynes Road. I'm married to Melissa, raised a couple of children here in town, and have been on the Board of Selectmen for a couple of decades now. I'm interested in staying on the board because I think it's important to have a couple of board members that know where the bodies are buried, so to speak, and have some sense of the history of the board and the other departments in town. That's my primary motivation, followed closely by the fact that I hate people making decisions for me, so I want to sort of be involved in most of the decision-making that I can get myself involved in. Things that I'm pleased that I've seen as a selectman on the various boards I've been on. As I mentioned, I've been on the board for a couple of decades. I was proud to have been part of what we refer to as Gazebo Field. When I was first on the board, that was not a public property. We actually bought the private property, subdivided it, sold the house, and added the field land as a park next to the town hall, and oversaw volunteer construction of the gazebo. I've been pleased with the growth of Parks and Rec over the past couple of decades. The Board of Selectmen doesn't have much to do with that, but we do oversee the budget and approve projects. And I was pleased with the board's response to Northern Pass when they came to Deerfield, and whether you were for or against the project. I think the Board of Selectmen was happy to take up Deerfield's best interests and make sure we didn't get run over by a large utility or conglomeration of utilities. Don't have a lot more than that to add. I'd appreciate your vote, and would love to be able to continue to serve the town of Deerfield for another 3 years. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. Next up, Mr. Pretorius.
Hello. Sorry, I don't like to stay around my ear, so I'm going to do this if that's all right. Hi, my name's Herman Pretorius. I live on Bloomfield Road, which is just off the south. I've been part of the community now for only a handful of years. Since my time in Deerfield, I've served on the Municipal Budget Committee for the last 2, and I had the privilege of chairing the Budget Committee over the last year, which was really a great experience for me. So a bit about myself. So I am newer to the community for sure. I grew up in New Hampshire, and shortly after graduating high school, I served in the military. I served a tour in Afghanistan. I came back, went to my undergraduate and graduate degree at UNH, and I've lived here ever since. It's our second house that we've owned. So I'm really ingrained in a lot of the I guess, ethics and morals of a good New Hampshire person. I really appreciate the state and everything that the state does. And I've really grown to love this community. As I mentioned, my participation in the NBC, my wife's also involved in the community quite a bit. It's quite a foundation in our family to give back to the community in every sense that we can. This is a good opportunity for me to run for the Board of Selectmen. Of course, Jeff isn't sitting up here. I talked to Jeff a few months ago. He had mentioned to me that he wasn't running, and we started discussing it. And I think it's a great opportunity for me to join the board, which is of interest to me, and also to add, for lack of better words, some fresh blood to the Board of Selectmen. I think this community is at a really interesting kind of turning point, for lack of a better word, where we have a lot of young families that are coming in. If you look at how the school is evolving from smaller classes in 8th grade to larger classes in elementary school, you look at like the developments that I live in, you can certainly see a lot of new families being interested in this community, which is really great. It's going to help this community flourish. And I'm excited for the challenges that we have, the police station being one of them, the growing population in our school, and I want to be as much of a part of that as I can. So this is my opportunity to do so, and I hope to earn your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Pretorius. Next up, Mr. Cooper.
Good evening, Deerfield voters. My name is John Cooper. I am running for the position of highway agent in this year's municipal election. I was raised in Candia. In December of 2017, my wife Kaylee and I bought a farm on Nottingham Road that we found to be the perfect place to raise a family. In the 2 years that I've lived in Deerfield, I have come to love my community and asked myself what I can do to give back. I have worked around heavy equipment, been involved with road work, and performed public service for as long as I can remember. At an early age, I was taught the value of hard work and have never lost sight of it. For 8 years, I worked as a subcontractor for the town of Candia, plowing snow in winter months, as well as working on summer road reconstruction projects. Since moving to Deerfield, I have worked closely with the current road agent, Mark Young, and the rest of the highway department on summer road jobs here in town. It has been a privilege of mine to work with and learn from knowledgeable men such as Mr. Young on how best to approach and complete various aspects of the job. If elected, I will continue the improvement of Deerfield's roads in a manner which keeps the taxpayers' money in mind. I am committed to maintaining a thrifty budget while also allowing room for improvements to be made on town infrastructure. I would like to see certain things such as dead trees and brush be pruned or removed as necessary to maintain safe roads and eliminate fall hazards. I would like to see the improvement of some of our more problematic dirt roads in town without disturbing their rural appeal. Honesty, integrity, and hard work are values I hold in high regard. If elected, I will serve to better the community and continue the efforts of all that have come before me. I humbly ask for your support on March 10th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Mr. Rollins.
Hi, my name's Steve Rollins. I'm running for highway agent in my hometown of Deerfield. I grew up on the site of W. Rollins Excavating, business that my father started. I attended the Deerfield George White School. Really liked the 4-day week. For the past, from the age of 12, I helped my father and brothers operating and repairing heavy equipment, welding, wrenching, whatever. Most during night and snowstorms. Shortly after high school, my father entrusted me to run the business. 14 years ago, I started Deerfield Sand and Gravel, a local trucking, excavating, and road maintenance company. I employ approximately 9 people. For 3 decades, I've plowed, paved, and maintained roads for the town of Deerfield, the town of Nottingham, and the state of New Hampshire. I decided to run for road agent to better serve my community. Running a business requires problem-solving skills, careful budget maintenance, and a working knowledge of trucks and equipment. As highway agent, I look forward to working with the community, the employees, the local government, to maintain safe roads for residents, commuters, and visitors. Just please vote for me on March 10th.
Thank you, Mr. Rollins. Mr. Dill.
I guess Andy started the tradition, we all have to stand now, so we all have to stand. My name's Alvin Dill. I have a farm up on Griffin Road. Kids and I have been here about 8 years, well, wife and the kids and I. Running for selectman again. I guess this is probably the better year for it, because last year there were a whole bunch of us and not many slots, and this year there's 2 slots and 3 of us running. Before we came to Deerfield, I lived in Northwood. I was a selectman for 2 3-year terms in Northwood. Before that, I was on the planning board. Here in town, I've been on the budget committee for a term. I live in town, I work in town, I'm in town all the time. I think that's a major advantage if you're going to be a selectman. Really enjoyed it in Northwood. I was the guy that worked with the road agent, worked with the dump guys. That was my angle. With the budget and everything else, we can get it done. Specific questions, I guess, would be probably more of my forte than standing up here and telling you guys about myself. But that's who I am, and we're running again. Appreciate your vote. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Dill. Mr. Holt.
Good evening, Dan Holdridge. I live on South Road. I just completed my first term as town moderator. I think the the biggest question I had as running for town moderator, people would ask me is, what is the town moderator? And for over 2 years now, I've been learning myself what a rewarding job it is to be able to lead the deliberative sessions, bringing your community together, helping to solve differences. As a 9/11 survivor, I found that one of the greatest gifts I can give to honor that is to bring people together and solve differences so there's not another one. And so I saw the town moderator as a spot where I could give back and give to my community and bring people together. And then with the town elections, we just had one the other night. I've been so fortunate to work with wonderful people like Joanna Waring and our awesome town clerk, Kelly Roberts, and Kim Karate, the deputy, and our assistant moderator, Eric, as well as Fran Menard and a lot of others that volunteer. And what a great way to give back, to help give people a voice through their votes. And so, again, I just completed my first term. I worked under Jack Hutchinson for quite a few years as he served as a great mentor. And now I've been able to learn a lot more, and I've introduced technology. So you may have noticed that the deliberative session we've had up on the screen so we can follow along. So I'm trying to do things to help people feel like they can be more a part of conversations, more along with providing solutions, so that when we leave, we may not agree with everything, but we sure can say that it was a fair place, a fair event, and we have a lot of respect for each other. So after learning so much, I sure want to continue on for the next 2 years, and I appreciate your support for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holdridge. Izzy?
My name's Christina Egan, and I live on Nottingham Road. This is my first time running for office in Deerfield. I'm looking to be on the library board. My husband Brian, moved here 13 years ago, and he was familiar with the town because he worked for a builder in town for several years and fell in love with Deerfield. So when it came time for us to settle down and start a family, we decided to come to Deerfield because he had grown to love it here. So we built our home 13 years ago. We have an 8-year-old son. He's in 2nd grade at DCS. His name's Sam. And one of our favorite places in town has always been the library. Throughout the years, we go there frequently, and it's been really exciting watching Sam develop his love for reading in libraries. He's participated in the Lego Club there, the summer reading program. We've done family game night. He's done gym and story time. So it's just a place that we go to quite a bit, and we're really excited to have it in town. A little background about me is I've worked for Liberty Life Assurance Company of Boston for 15 years, but it's now Lincoln Financial Group because we were acquired by them. I also love community service and volunteer work. I am on the planning committee for the Concord Multicultural Festival. I also volunteer for the summer literacy program for the New American Africans group in Concord, and I love doing all of that service work and community volunteer work, but I really would love to have the opportunity to serve the town I live in and that my son's growing up in. So I would really appreciate your vote and support, and I just thank you for listening and having me here.
Thank you, Ms. Egan. Mr. Verville?
I was hoping Dan was going to break the trend, but I guess he didn't. I'd like to thank the Deerfield PTO for hosting this event. It's a fantastic event, fairly long running. I'd like to thank Mr. Gross for being an MC. My name is Kevin Verville. I live on the Karen Road with my wife and 2 children. We've lived in Deerfield for 9 years now, 10 years? 10 years now. And I grew up in Pembroke, so I'm a New Hampshire native, relatively local. I'm running for Municipal Budget Committee. I served 7 years on the Budget Committee in the past. There are several openings this year, so I thought I would toss my name back into the ring. So the process is department heads make the budget, they pass it on to the governing body, the select board or the school board, then it goes to the NBC. The NBC makes some fresh sausage out of it, then we send it to deliberative, it becomes your budget, and then it ends up on the ballot. So it's a nice opportunity to be involved, to see how government works. I enjoy the work. I understand both the town and the school budget fairly well, and I'd like to give back. I've been in public service since we moved here in 2009. I've served on the Open Space Committee, the School Budget Committee. I was a trustee of the trust funds. I was on the Safety Services Steering Committee. I'm currently one of your state representatives. So I like to stay involved. Like everybody that's up here, we like to give back to the community. And so this is the way that I like to give back. I find it personally rewarding. And so I would ask for your vote on Tuesday, the 10th of March. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Ms. Messier.
Hi, I'm Jocelyn Messier. I live on South Road. I have lived here for 35 years, moving from Manchester, where I lived all my life. I retired from teaching in Manchester in 2007. Thought that was retirement, and then I ended up working at the Lovin' Spoonful, Mary's Cafe. You might have seen me here signing your kids in at the window. And now you can find me as the receptionist part-time at the local eye care center. So I'm really not retired at all. I have never run for public office, unless you want to count running for dorm president 50 years ago at UNH. But I have served as in a variety of roles in different organizations that I have been with through the years. I have seen in 35 years how this town has grown, and I do love it here immensely. And I, being civic-minded, have watched things happen, and I believe that we're going to be faced with some rather big decisions as far as the infrastructure and building. But I really am just wanting to serve you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Messier. Okay, thank you everybody for your opening remarks. Now we'll open the floor for questions for our candidates.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Jeannie Menard. I live on Mountain Road, and I have two questions, but I'll skip out if somebody wanted to jump in between the two for the road highway crew. And this has to, my first question has to do with road salt use. What policy or procedures would you promote regarding salting town roads that cross rivers or streams like the Lamprey River, like James City Road Bridge, Nottingham Mountain Road? This isn't a trick question. I just want to know how you feel about road salt use and its impact on water.
Okay. Why don't we start with Mr. Cooper?
I think it's definitely something that we need to consider. I think over the years, the amount of salt that gets used has progressively gotten worse, and I think it has an impact on some of the environmental things in town. And I don't necessarily think it would be a bad thing to try to limit it on some areas that are wetlands and areas like that.
Thank you. Mr. Rollins?
Well, I plow for Deerfield, and I plow Gulf Road, which is right on the edge of the lake. And what I do basically is salt in one direction. So I use 50% of the material that I would use on the other road, just to try to cut down on the amount of salt going into the lake. And that's pretty much what we do.
Okay. All right. Other questions? Or anyone up here? It's all yours.
I actually have to go to the planning board meeting just for a brief time, so I appreciate being able to do my questions while I have the opportunity. So, Steve, you gave us a good outline of your work experience and working with other people in terms of a crew and your leadership. So I guess I'm going to address this to you, John. What experience do you have in supervising a work crew?
Well, pretty much right after I graduated high school, I worked in multiple family businesses. My parents owned Caleb Lake Camping Area in Auburn, and I would help manage that in the summertime. And after that, I worked with my grandfather in Chester for Chester Forest Products, and I also acted as a manager there, driving trucks and keeping track of employees, making sure all this paperwork lines up. My wife and I own a farm together that we need to keep everything straight with. I try to be organized and keep all my ducks in a row.
Thank you. Other questions? This is your opportunity. Jeannie. Gonna run out of paper.
So I think this will be, I had originally thought that I would address this to a planning board member, but I'm not seeing any here, so I'm going to just toss this to selectmen because I think as a community, this is a community issue. So just a simple yes or no initially, and then a follow-up. Do either of you agree that Deerfield, along with other New Hampshire communities all across the state, we're in a critical shortage of affordable housing options, both in terms of rentals and in terms of single-family homes?
Yeah, I'll start with that. And I would say yes, we are in that situation. And you may recall, I was actually in a film with the local developer and some other folks about the critical need for affordable housing in Rockingham County that focused on Deerfield. I don't know if that's still available. You may be able to find it on old PBS links. But I think it is a critical problem for the state of New Hampshire below the notch, and certainly in Deerfield as well.
Mr. Cordes?
I'm also going to respond with a yes. So I work in the technology field, and certainly I work down in Hanscom Air Force Base, and so I drive down 93 every day, and you can see the massive expansion that's happening from exit 5 and below, exit 4, 5 and below. So, if you look at just kind of what local industry is doing, where technology is driving, particularly in Manchester, for those that follow the news, you know that BAE just bought a huge facility. One of the largest employers in New Hampshire just bought a facility in Manchester. And so Manchester's bursting at the seams. It's not too long before, that bubble grows, right? You look at Auburn and Hooksett, just look at the developments that are happening there, and you kind of start realizing that Deerfield's, it's one of the next towns, as this technology boom and as people start to migrate towards New Hampshire, because it's becoming an access location for getting down into Massachusetts. So I think it's a New Hampshire problem, like Andy said, probably from the notch below. But certainly, it's a problem that we're going to have to look at and understand, particularly with how much our infrastructure can support, within the next 5 or 10 years. I don't think that's a question. I think that's an incredibly relevant question, and I don't think there's much debate in, how fast southern New Hampshire is growing.
Thank you. Mr. Dill?
Yeah, there's 3 of us, not just a couple. I'm just added it. Yes and no. Yes, we've been short of housing my whole life. I grew up in this area. We've never had rentals in this area. It's been a perennial problem in New England. On the other hand, I think we're facing a critical shortage of farmland around here. This town is going to have to really come to balance on where we're going to grow, if we're going to conserve more, if we're going to grow more. And I think that's a Rockingham County issue, that's a southern New Hampshire issue, that's a New England issue. And there are more and more people moving into this town. remember when I was a kid, this was a pretty small town, and Nottingham was too. It's not anymore. So yes, we're low on housing, but yes, we're low on other things too. And we're, as a town, we're going to have to do a lot of planning before we just balancing that, yes, we need more housing, and now we're going to need more schools, and now we're going to need more infrastructure, and all of that. But I think that the growth in this part of New Hampshire is crazy. And that's your follow-up.
Thank you.
And one last part to this. Do you think with the median price in New Hampshire for a single-family home being $300,000, do you think Deerfield is ready to embrace affordable housing?
I don't know that Deerfield is necessarily ready to embrace affordable housing, depending on what you're speaking about specifically. Over the past 20 years that I've been on the board, I've certainly heard grumbling about multifamily houses. Even duplexes have been fairly controversial in terms of development in Deerfield. So I'm not sure how committed the community is to affordable housing. I think Alden's comments reflect maybe a bigger concern in Deerfield. I've certainly heard much more commentary about growth. The last census, 2010, Deerfield was around 4,200. I would suspect that after the next census, we're going to be around 5,000 in population. We've got several developments slated to go when the snow's gone and the ground is unfrozen in Deerfield right now. And I think it's going to be a real struggle to balance the need for affordable housing with the need to keep Deerfield rural and not completely developed. Although I would add that Deerfield is in a very good position with 2 state parks and a lot of conservation land that a lot of the groundwork has been laid to prevent Deerfield from being overrun by development.
Mr. Pretorius?
Sure. So I don't know if I have much to add, beyond kind of my general agreement with what Andy's saying. I think that as we explore this, the concept of affordable housing and whether that manifests itself in multifamily homes or whatever that looks like, there's so many different, it's such a complex issue to start to address, right? It doesn't make sense necessarily to investigate multifamily homes if the community as a whole can't support, the large influx of something like that, although necessary for southern New Hampshire can entertain, right? There's a huge infrastructure that has to be set up to even, start going down that road. And I think that as we stand today, we're already having a lot of challenges supporting the current, Deerfield population. I think that certainly we have a few bridges to cross. I think, like I mentioned, that New Hampshire as a whole probably has to deal with this, or at least southern New Hampshire. Personally, I appreciate the identity of Deerfield, right? If I had my personal viewpoint of the world, right, it would be to maintain the rural nature of what Deerfield is. I like this community. I like the small town feel. That's why I moved here. But I also appreciate and empathize with the necessities of affordable housing, right? It's we should try to include, and help where we can, right? And as what's reasonable with what we have in place, right?
Thank you. Mr. Dill, any further?
Well, I don't know about Herman, but I know as the real estate agent that sold 2 out of 3 of us our houses, that you probably have a better feeling on the housing stocks in Deerfield than I do. I'm blown away that the median price of housing is that high in Deerfield, but it's that high all over New Hampshire, and I'm glad I'm not trying to buy a house. But I don't think it's specifically a selectman issue, and I don't think it's anything that I would feel qualified to speak on.
Thank you. Floor is open.
Not to belabor, this is sort of Leila Thompson, Middle Road, targeted at the 3 people who have just had to answer the last several questions, and it's along the vein of the last one, because, a little plug, there is a warrant article on the ballot this year for the planning board for $30,000 to update our master plan, which, a plug, I think it's necessary, it's out of date. For the three of you, and I'm going to start over here and work so you don't get to answer first, where do you see, as a potential selectman, your place in the creation? Do you support a master plan? Where do you see, is it a collaborative effort? Is it something independent? What's the interplay between the two boards?
Well, I was on the planning board in Northwood when they were redoing their master plan. We'd be foolish not to update the master plan. I mean, when you're applying for grants on a federal level and even to a state level, one of the things they're going to ask for is a copy of your master plan. And if we don't do that, we're going to lose out on a lot of potential funding for the infrastructure that we're going to have to put into that master plan. The town is growing. We are going to have to take a serious look at infrastructure in this town. And to piggyback on that, I think the other warrant article about the fire station, I definitely support. We have to start looking at planning and expanding the infrastructure in this town. We keep growing. I think we're going to be a little higher. My guess on the census is like 5,500, but it's hard to tell. We'll know in a year. But yes, I absolutely support the fact that we need to update the master plan. It would just be completely short-sighted if it's not.
Thank you, Mr. Pretorius.
Yeah, I also agree that we should update our master plan. You know, just the fact that it's a gating factor for a lot of our grant applications, right? So many of our infrastructure improvements or budget items were dependent on, you know, us receiving grants. Take the Hartford Brookfield as an example, right? So I think it's necessary to do so. I don't think that, you know, and Alden alluded to this, is that this has to be a cooperative effort, right? This I don't know if it's necessarily isolated to, you know, the selectmen, right? There are brilliant people scattered all over this town, and certainly not, the brilliance is certainly not isolated to one of these groups, right? And so, so just for the mere fact that it's a gating feature or gating function, and that the town is involved, right? Since our last sentence, the town has involved. That it's just important for us to just do a sanity check, do the master plan, redo the master plan, and what is our current reality, you know, of where we stand today.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson.
Yeah, creation of the master plan and updating of the master plan by state RSA is the planning board's baby, and the planning board should lead a collaborative effort to update the master plan as necessary. State planning would advise you to keep your master plan updated on about a 5-year cycle. I think Deerfield is 9 or 10 years out of that cycle right now. In addition to federal grants, when you fill out the application, there's a box to check. If you've got a master plan, you generally move forward if you do have an updated master plan, as opposed to having no master plan or a drastically out-of-date master plan. That also applies, we've seen that apply with regard to FEMA money for disasters. Communities that have an updated master plan typically get road money for repair, that sort of thing, after disasters more quickly than communities that don't. And even more important than financial assistance is legal liability. If a developer takes your planning board or your town to court, for example, over your zoning laws and your planning laws, the court will, one of the first things they look to identify is, does your town have a master plan? Is it up to date? And if you've done no real planning, made no attempt to keep your master plan up to date, you can find yourself on the wrong end of the legal equation and put the town at jeopardy. So it's absolutely important. It's critical that the planning board leads the charge in updating the master plan and does it collaboratively with the rest of the town, which I'm sure they will.
Thank you. Other questions? Municipal Budget Committee candidates, perhaps?
I'll do it for the municipal budget. you can answer this, Kevin, but it excludes you a little bit, but more on what budgeting experience do you have of sort of this magnitude or experience looking at, analyzing, either one of you, but Kevin is sort of,
Ms. Messer?
all right.
Now?
Yes.
Okay. As far as working with budgets, I have served as treasurer in a number of organizations that had to structure budgets. I helped structure one when I worked in Manchester. And I was part of the financial process there. I have watched carefully what's happened here over the last 35 years. And as somebody said, can you read, can you write, can you add, and can you listen? And the answer to all those questions is yes.
Thank you. Mr. Verga?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So except for the mortgage, we're in the black. So as a family, we know how to budget. I spent 7 years looking at very fine detail with both the municipal and the school district budget. Obviously, I like to keep a hand in. I review the proposed budgets every year as they are published and work their way through the system. So I certainly have a familiarity with those budgets. You have to know how to read, you have to know how to write, you have to know how to add, but sometimes you also need to know how to subtract. And we shouldn't forget that. Not that is the primary focus, right? It's about using the people's money wisely. When we spend, every penny the government spends comes out of somebody's pocket. And I don't know how many of you know this, but in Deerfield, 20% of our kids are on the free lunch program, right? Which tells us a little something about families in Deerfield. So every dollar that we take from those families for taxation comes out of money that they would otherwise have for their family needs, for raising their children, for people on fixed incomes, our seniors. And so we have a lot of priorities in this town. We certainly are facing some very large projects that are going to be expensive. And to be able to justify those to the broader population, we really have to convince the voters, right, that we are spending the money that we are spending now in the most frugal, efficient manner possible to make it easier to justify things like the police department, right? The police station is in dire need of improvement. Fire and rescue is in dire need of improvement. This school is in dire need of expansion. And for anybody that wants to argue that, because there are some that want to argue it, all you got to do is look out in that parking lot. There's 4 classrooms that have been in that parking lot for decades, right? These things need to be addressed sooner rather than later. So we really need to keep the regular budgets under as tight control as we can to ease the burden of getting these other things approved at the ballot box.
Thank you. Other questions? All set? Really? Okay. All right, well, I guess you are all released. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to speak, to introduce him or herself, and then we'll go to questions from the assembly.
No.
So, if you are ready, we'll start at the far end. Introduce yourself, and you have 3 minutes.
Sure.
I'm running for one of the 2 open seats for the Deerfield School Board. I live in Deerfield with my wife Kelly and 2 daughters on a 15-acre horse farm, which we run as a business. My family has been in town for the last 5 years, as I'd mentioned, and I have 2 girls currently going to DCS, kindergarten and 1st grade. I have a decade of professional experience, currently as a software project manager for a New Hampshire-based technology company. I also have nearly 8 years' experience volunteering as a school board vice chair, an environmental commission member, and a community service board officer. I'm proud to serve currently on the board for the Deerfield Sons of the American Legion, where I'm leading an initiative to identify opportunities for the Sons to give back to the town and surrounding communities. From the Parks and Rec Department to Catamount Limited and our very own DCS, broader Rockingham County organizations and activities as well. When I learned that Ken Heckman and Jim Daly were not seeking re-election for the Deerfield School Board, I saw a perfect opportunity to take on a more visible role and affect positive change within the community. The people I've gotten to know while serving as the vice chair for a local school board, as a member of the DCS Space Needs Committee, and most recently on DCS Curriculum Review Board, I find and believe that I'm uniquely qualified to collaborate with the returning board members of the DCS staff. I won't have all the answers, however I can commit to listening and engaging in thoughtful and constructive decisions with people who share my own views, oppose my views, and are undecided. This will ultimately enable me to make educated decisions as a board member or provide recommendations to my fellow board members. I look forward to having the opportunity to serve the town as an elected school board official, and I'm asking for your vote on March 10th. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Coe.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming out. I was curious to see what the turnout would look like. I'm in many ways a lifelong resident of Deerfield. Moved here in 1984. Attended, I believe I was the inaugural class here at DCS. I actually took speech pathology classes at the old George B. White building, given my pronunciation of inaugural. Went pretty well, but you know, when it was time for our children to get into grade school, we decided that this was a community we wanted to raise them in. I've got a daughter now in 5th grade and a son in 1st grade. And this community just means everything to our family. I'm involved with the youth athletic programs. I coach soccer for my kids in the fall, basketball in the winter season. Outside of family life, I'm a small business owner. I own a construction company with 15 employees. Every single day I deal with making tough budget decisions and learning how to spend money in the most effective way possible. You know, I feel that I'm uniquely qualified to look at budgets and understand the differences between wants and needs. I'm acutely aware of the challenges we all face with the tax rates in town, but I also know that we need to spend money in order to continue to create a great community. You know, I don't bring an agenda per se to this board. What I bring is a goal to continue the great spirit of excellence that this community and this school embodies. I look forward to working with everybody in the community, listening to their ideas and making the best decisions at the end of the day that are going to be the best for my kids, for your kids, and also conscious and aware of the tax burden placed on all of our citizens. I do know that we're facing some serious space issues in this school. As I said, I was in the 1st class here. This town has grown and grown and grown. Having a strong construction background, I can bring a lot to the table in the board as we look at what our options are in expanding our footprint here at Deerfield Community School. And also, our high school contract's up for negotiation in a few years. Being ingrained in this community, having attended Co-Brown Academy, I have a strong understanding of the high schools around here, and I look forward to working towards coming up with a good solution for our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Thompson.
My thing is buzzing. I have to be which one of these doesn't look like the rest. That's my job here today. My name is Layla Thompson. I've lived in town for 20 years. I have one child, and he attended DCS from kindergarten through 8th grade. He's currently a high schooler. So I have to jokingly say what's different about me, or other than the very obvious, is I have a little bit of a different perspective. I have a very different background. I worked for Fleet Bank and Bank of America, so I am well versed in the financial industry, running budgets. As a manager for 6 years, I was in charge of my branch, my budget, and I assure you, no matter how deep their pockets were, they expected us to adhere to them. I worked for 5 years as a corporate trainer, so I have a training coaching background. My son is no longer at this school, and one of the things sitting up here that really I want to stress is I'm running for the Deerfield School Board, not the Deerfield Community School Board. Because this school board represents, first and foremost to me, all children in this community. Whether they attend this school, whether they're in high school, whether they homeschool, they're all children in our community. I also represent the community as a whole in that we are dealing with the largest chunk of tax dollars. And I think we need a community spirit, even though I'm saying I'm not the community school. I think a few of the things that I would love to see or try to bring to this is a perspective of wanting more community involvement, wanting a more collaborative effort, putting the community as a whole on the table. I'm very anxious to see if they do the master plan, because I think as this school is, and the school board, we are part of the community, we interplay with it, and it should be, all the decisions made in this should be made with that in mind, with all of the children and all of the community members, and not one single child.
Thank you. Mr. Berber.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So my name's Kevin Verville. I've lived in Deerfield for the last 10 years. I live here with my wife. I've got twin girls that attend DCS. They went to the cooperative preschool before coming over here to DCS. And so we're committed to the community. We actually moved here because of the schools as well, when my wife and I were looking to relocate. I'm a former New Hampshire certified science teacher, so I used to teach chemistry, physical science down in Hollisbrook Line High School down in New Hampshire. So I'm a former school teacher. For the last 18 years, I've been a technical director for a family-owned multinational manufacturing company with world headquarters in Manchester. So I get to see the world but live in paradise, which is a pretty good gig. There's a lot of open issues before the school board, important issues that really are coming to a head for a few of them, and for a few of them, they've just been lingering for a very, very long time with very, from my point of view, my perspective, very little movement forward. So one of the things that I would like to see as we reconsider the contract with Concord is that contract runs down in 2024. And that time is going to go by very, very quickly. It takes time to get the groundwork. I would like to see the required minimum number of students from Deerfield committed to Concord be eliminated, so that we can allow the money to follow the student, so that if students and families want to choose another option, that they be able to do that easily. So within current state law, we can certainly do that. So we can contract with Concord or any other public high school to accept all the Deerfield students. The only thing that stops us from providing school choice to Deerfield families is that minimum. Concord has a declining student population still. Right? The last time we negotiated this contract, they greatly reduced tuition because Deerfield students were high-value targets because of declining enrollment, and they still have declining enrollment. I see the little time card coming up. The other thing is the expansion of this school. We have 4 classrooms out in that parking lot. They've been there for decades. We hear talk about community solution and rooms for the future of teaching, whatever teaching tomorrow is going to look like. When I was on the Safety Service Steering Committee, this town wants Yankee solutions, right? What we need is classrooms and bathrooms. We need 4 classrooms just to replace what's out in the parking lot. If you put another maybe 8 classrooms, so 12 classrooms and bathrooms, you could go a long way to alleviate overcrowding at a very reasonable price. And that's the way I think we should be looking at it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, candidates, for your opening remarks. The floor is now open to questions.
Hi, my name is Christina Baker. I live on Middle Road. I would just like the candidates, I'd like to go down the line and just, and if you could just give your answers, whether you're in support or not, of adding a second choice to our high school program. I personally, and when I say add a second choice, I know that we have a lot of families who are very happy with Concord, and I certainly would never want to take anything away from a family that's happy there. But recognizing that a lot of people in this community move here for the rural feel and the rural environment and maybe are not as comfortable sending their kids to a city high school, big city high school, which Concord absolutely is. So if we could just go down the line and you could say whether or not you support adding a second choice or not, that would be great.
Great. I'll start with Mr. Lee.
So, I guess the short answer is, my personal belief is that I would like to have some sort of option for kids. I have two daughters. You know, in my background with my brother and I, you know, I believe that I should have gone to a trade school. I think I would have excelled there. And I didn't have the opportunity to do so. And my brother went to maybe like a normal path through, you know, college and took that approach. So I think giving families the opportunity would be a good approach. I don't necessarily think that formalizing something would be the best course, but I know that we have some warrant articles that the town is going to be basically advising the school board on what they're looking for. So I hope to use that input as well as future conversations and data to make, you know, I guess a decision at a later date.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
So, in a nutshell, yes, but there's a lot to unpack with that question. In the last 2 weeks, I have learned and read more about school of records and all the legalities and the frameworks that come with it. And it's not as simple as just saying there's a second choice. When I went to this school, you had the option of going to Co-Brown, Central High, Memorial. You know, there was a plethora of schools. We didn't have a school of record then, though. And the grade following me, there was actually an instance where 2 kids didn't have a high school to go to because there was no school of record, I believe. I was talking with my mother about that earlier this afternoon. It's a complicated issue. I agree with you. It is a rural town. I had an incredible experience at Co-Brown Northwood Academy, but it's more expensive. So it's easy to say yes and just try to give you an answer that sounds good. In general, I support it, but I don't know enough right now at this moment to give you the best answer and the right answer, and one that's actually legally feasible. I need to do a lot more work and a lot more reading to fully understand it.
Thank you. Ms. Thompson.
I'm talking into this, right? So full transparency, I'm the one parent up here who is in fact a parent of a high schooler. So to be transparent, my son does not attend Concord High School. So as a parent, I feel strongly that my son should have had a different choice. The high school he does attend is the Academy of Science and Design, and it is not a high school that I would advocate that everyone would want to send their child. But I am very thankful that I was able to make a choice for myself. So it would behoove me to say, yes, I strongly, strongly support having a choice for parents. But I differentiate a little bit from the last two. I believe we should have a school of record. In fact, I think we should have really ultimately two choices and follow the model that some towns around us are doing, having a larger choice, because I think there are strong supporters for Concord in this town. It has served the town very well, and it should be, no one should fear that we're going to take that off the table. I also think if we have a smaller school, and while Co-Brown is a great school, I wouldn't necessarily even say at this moment I have a certain school. I think though we should have something that has a smaller student body that is an option, that would be more in line with what some of our students are used to. Inwood excel if they have that choice.
Thank you. Mr. Verba.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you for the question. It's an excellent one. The short answer, surprisingly enough, is no. I don't think that a two-school solution is the solution. I agree, we should be contracted with a school to guarantee that we have a home for every student in Deerfield. That I think we all agree is critically important. But there's a lot of different schemes currently employed across New Hampshire in different communities. I've been studying this for almost a decade now. I know most of the experts personally in New Hampshire on what those options look like, how they work, what their legality is. I'm not, if I'm elected to this school board, I don't expect to necessarily get my way with this. But the thing that I would advocate for is a school contract. A school of record actually, there's no, you can't find that in RSA or in ed rules, right? That really doesn't exist. So I think you have to have a school contract. And then I think the best option for the most people is then to allow that amount of money that you would otherwise pay tuition to for that contracted school to follow the student wherever their family wants to send them. So if, let's pretend, we renew the contract with Concord, right? So we would continue a contract with Concord. We would presumably continue providing transportation to Concord. If you don't want to send your kids to Concord, and you can find another school that will accept them, then you do that, but you're on the hook for the transportation on your own. The difference between what Mr. Kelly spoke of and today is back then, the population in New Hampshire was on the increase, and the number of available slots in public schools was decreasing. And Deerfield kids got crowded out, right? The world doesn't stay the same. In fact, now we're in the absolute opposite situation. So virtually every town in New Hampshire has decreasing student population, except for guess who? Deerfield, right? Cole Brown already reached out to our school board and said, hey, let's talk, right? So there are definitely schools that are interested. What I want is I want families to be able to make the decision of what they believe is educationally best for their own children. Public education doesn't mean you have the public school. It means we publicly fund the education of the children that live in our community. And there's a lot of different schemes. The model that I talk about, understand, that model is in use today in communities. If people would like to talk to me after, my time's run out. If you want to talk to me after, I'll tell you what communities are doing. I'll tell you what other communities are doing. There's a lot of different solutions. We should keep a very open mind. But I know what the law is, I know what communities are doing, and I can bring that experience to the table. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Doug Schlu, I'm Drive. How many, so say that it is an increase in cost to remove a limit for students to send to the school of record, the main school. How much more are you willing to pay per student to allow for that choice? I'll leave that open to anybody that wants to answer the question.
We'll start on this end. Mr. Verba.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you for the question. That's an excellent question. It's not easy to answer in an open forum. And the reason it's not easy to answer in an open forum is we'll be negotiating with schools. And so if Concord High watches this video and finds out somebody's willing to pay 5% more, 10% more, 20% more as a premium, then when they go into the negotiation, they already know 1/5 of the board's opinion. So honestly, I don't see why it would cost us more, and there's a reason for that. Right now, not all our kids that leave 8th grade go to Concord High. They're disappearing off the roll. You know where they go? They go to other schools. They leave the district. Parents, families are paying for private school and other options already, right? So Concord can't budget on the 8th grade class size. We could negotiate to say, look, we're not going to give you a minimum, right? We don't want that in the contract, but we guarantee the straw poll 7th and 8th grade classes. and ask families, what's your likely intention? When your student graduates, are you likely to send to Concord, or are you likely to choose another option? And that would give them numbers, probably better numbers than they're getting now, than they're budgeting on now, to be able to budget in the future. They're on declining enrollment. They need students. If that contract gets negotiated, if we put it out to bid for other schools, and I would advocate that we do that as a community, if nothing else, just to see what the market is, Concord's going to see that and realize that they have the potential of losing, basically 50 kids plus or minus a year. And that's not insignificant for them. In the last negotiation, Deerfield was in the driver's seat. That's why Concord lowered the tuition so much 10 years ago, to keep us in their basket. We're still in the driver's seat. They still have declining enrollment, right? So I don't see that as too much of a threat, to be honest with you. If you want a more direct answer, I'd be happy to speak, sort of one-on-one, but I don't want to weaken the potential negotiation position of the Deerfield School District with potential schools we may or may not contract with. If you'd oblige me that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Thompson?
To answer that question, currently in Concord, we pay the tuition, there's a fee in addition to busing. I think as a parent that it is fair, as going back to what Kevin had originally suggested, to match that amount. So take the total cost. And if you look over the last, say, 5 to 6 years at schools that students have attended, we've had students attend Bow, we've had students attend Pembroke Academy, both of which cost less than Concord. So Concord is not the lowest priced school out there, even though we have a contract with them. So that does allow for a dollar amount that families would not be locked into. I think it's fair to match that amount.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly?
So I'm going to actually kind of agree with Kevin on this one. Surprise, surprise. Not so much because I'm worried that anyone from Concord is going to watch this. Hello if you are. More so, honestly, Devin and everyone, it's a question that I'm not prepared to answer tonight. As a board member, I can tell you that when I'm presented with questions like that, I know where to do the research, who to ask, and how to get the information. But tonight, not at a point where I can answer it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Reardon?
So I'll try to make this one short. So I think first and foremost, I'd like to get a debriefing from the returning board members, and maybe the board members that are leaving. They went through the contracting process with Concord most recently. I think they're probably the most knowledgeable on this topic of the process that they had to go through, the timing, and those sorts of things. So first, getting up to speed on that, I think, is of the most important. Secondly, to talk a little bit about the tax burden side of things. I mentioned, obviously, I'm a business owner in town. And I'm also a family man with 2 daughters in school. So I have kind of conflicting interests there. I want to spend as much money as I can on this school so my kids can have the best education they can, while at the same time not raising my taxes to a level where I'm going to have to try to uproot my business. And if you know anything about horse farms, they don't really move. So I'm pretty much in my forever house right now. So I just wanted to make that point. And then the last thing, I think the most important really is sales negotiations, contracts. So I think that is going to weigh heavily on the process that we go through relating to a previous question about either school choice, multiple schools, money following children, whatever I think the end goal and outcome is. I think it's going to come down to sales negotiations and redlining contracts and really fighting for our kids. So that's what I plan to do. So it's kind of a longer answer than I think I said I was going to give, but there you have it.
Thank you. Mr. Rubio, follow-up, brief.
Yeah, not really a follow-up, just for clarification, none of the school board members currently participated in the negotiation of the Concord contract. That was all done by a completely different previous board, so none of the 5 people that are currently on the board had anything to do with that contract.
Thank you. Other questions?
Hi, Trevor Pretorius, Deerfield Road. Being on the budget committee, I can tell you that getting additional budgets approved for police stations or whatever the case may be can be very difficult to do. One of the big challenges that the community has is expanding the school. Talked about it a little bit, moving to the 4 classrooms that are here. You know, a growing population, not enough space. So, I know none of you are on the school board right now, but as you look forward to addressing a problem, how do you go about convincing the town, right, of modifying this building, whether it's adding on, whether it's building up, building out, whatever the case may be, where that is going to be a significant undertaking, where we're struggling to get warrant articles approved for tens of thousands of dollars, and certainly not multi-million. So,
Thank you. Great, thanks. We'll start in the middle. Mr. Kelly.
Well, I think, kind of,
Big one.
I think I would first go to the town with the facts, right? We don't meet the minimum requirements set forth by the State Department of Education. Our school, I believe, is suitable to house 450 students. We've been in excess of that now for 10 plus years. So you bring them with the facts, you then present an honest argument, honest case. Yes, Deerfield's full of frugal Yankees, absolutely. But, we built this school back in the later 80s, early 90s, when we had a great school at the George B. White, right? And you look at the effect that has had on the tax rate. And if you look at, yes, we're all scared of our taxes going up. Look at the tax rate from the 80s until 2020. Our tax rate has stayed pretty constant. Yes, there's been years where it's hit 38 per thousand. That was 1 year, and then we're back down to the $21 per thousand. $5 million, $10 million sounds scary, but when you get out there and you talk to people and you explain to them the effect that it's going to have on their budget in the consequences of not acting, right? Not being in compliance with the State Department of Education. Our town's not shrinking, right? You live in Hartford Brook. There's going to be another development going in, next year, the following year, right? Where are we going to put these kids? Are we going to waste money on modulars again? Those classrooms have cost us an arm and a leg because we continue to pay and lease those units. And so you just have an honest conversation, and not everybody's going to like it, but it's the reality that we're faced with.
Great, thank you. Mrs. Thompson.
I want to go next. So the school was built in 1990 and has had one addition since. So when it was built, it was for that amount, and we have had an addition. Where we are sitting at this moment was part of the addition, because originally the gym was where people ate. So they rolled the tables in, had lunch, and they were rolled out. And there was an addition put on. It was done with school funding money that was to provide kindergarten. So we will always need kindergarten in this building because those rooms were paid with kindergarten funding. So it sort of ties what we can do with the building and where we can. In addition, when the school was built, it was in compliance. If your town grows, they don't come in with a tape measure. So we are in compliance with the room because it was built at that point, and then we stay under that compliance. We are within compliance with teacher to student ratio. We're well within compliance. So I take an approach. In addition, we are actually not at our peak. 580 students was our peak. So to go back to how do you convince people, I am fully on board that I think as a town, starting with the planning board, starting with a master plan, starting with something that we all agree with at the time we're living here, at the time we can vote and have a say, that it be a collaborative effort. I think the way this town works, the way it looks, the way it grows, needs to be done collaboratively. So everybody's having a say. What do we need first? We should have a hierarchy. And I think you get a lot more buy-in when people really know what we need, when we need it, what's going to be the best, how it's going to impact everyone, and you get a lot more cooperation in that. I don't think the schools should be fighting with the fire department, with the police department for funding. I think we really need to do things with an approach that impacts the entire town, not just this building. And again, being part of the school board, this building isn't the only priority. Every student is, and while this building is a huge part of it, I think having a clear perspective, and I also think that the school board, I would love to see better communication coming out, maybe a little blurb in the town report, not just how we are economically, but academically, student involvement, town involvement. I think if we had all of those things, we would have a better chance at moving things forward. The more you know about something, the more you're going to support it.
Thank you. Mr. Reardon.
Sure. So this will be my second approach to make this quick. I'm gonna reply and basically say that I think what needs to be done is paint a more clear picture for the residents of the town. A couple of folks have talked about the leasing expenses that we've been paying for however long those modulars have been there. So obviously there's that cost, reoccurring cost. You also look at some of the things that folks have said previously about the modulars. There's safety concerns with children moving back and forth between the two buildings. And there's also potential, legal expenses or costs that we can incur by not having a building or a property suitable for all of our children.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Burbank.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you for the question. It's an excellent one. But I'm not sure I'm in agreement. So the police station bond almost passed last year. That was a very close vote. And so it has a very high probability of passing this year. The reason it has a higher probability of passing this year is because it came back. So in my 10 years of watching Deerfield warrants, you see things that pop up that are, oh my goodness, we have to do this. If we don't do this, we are gonna have trouble, right? And then it doesn't pass, and then you don't hear about it for 5 or 7 years. And then somebody brings it back, and oh my goodness, we should do that. And I'm convinced that voters look and say, well, the last time you said we had to do it, and we didn't, and the sky didn't fall. Now you're back 5 years later, 7 years later, another bite of the apple. The school board hasn't done that. They haven't floated warrants. But that, on the municipal side, that's one of the challenges. If something is important and you put it on the warrant and it doesn't pass, you have to come back year after year after year, and you have to refine and better articulate your case. The way that you do that is you need community voice, right? It's not a blurb in the town report that, I don't know, what, are there 12 of us that read that, right? When I ran before, I advocated for listening sessions, to have the school board have events where people could come in and speak freely with the school board to let them know what's on their mind. The last one we held was 3 years ago, and it was about the high school, right? If you want to get the message out, you have to hold those meetings. You have to hear from people in an open format where they can speak freely, have a public discussion, because the way the word gets out is from us talking to each other, right? Not arguing. Maybe it's arguing, maybe it's debate, but we have to talk to each other. You have to have the conversation, right? You want what? You want 12 classrooms and bathrooms? Where do you come up with that? Well, I come up with that because I got 4 classrooms in the parking lot, and if I add 1 classroom per grade, that goes a long way to meeting the current and future needs of this school. You have to get the community involved. You have to invite them in. When we held those listening sessions, they were well attended. They got generally an audience this size or larger. People have to feel welcome to come in, express themselves freely, and that word of mouth is how you get these things to move forward. So the question was, how do you get these bond issues to pass? You invite people to come in, you address as many concerns as you possibly can so you get the most community buy-in, and I think that would be a very, very effective way to get this done in a fairly timely manner. This is, this is way overdue, so let's actually get done. The studies, the studies on population, the school board's been looking at those, they go back 3 years now. I mean, we've been talking about this forever. Let's stop talking, let's come up with a plan and move this forward. We need to move something forward.
Thank you. Other questions?
Kevin, you kind of stole my thunder because that actually was going to be part of one of my questions. So I've lived here for 6 years. I've gone to a couple of school board meetings, and I'll only speak for myself, but I can say that I found them to be not that welcoming to parents, and not through any intention of a school board member. I don't believe I believe all of our school board members are hardworking and they're committed to the school. But the format of the school board meeting is not welcoming to a parent. You can't ask questions, you can't get clarifications, and I understand why those rules are in place so that the meetings don't go on for hours, and I appreciate that. But as a parent, it's very frustrating to make the time, find the childcare to attend a school board meeting, only to sit there and it sort of seems like the school board expects you to know what they've talked about forever, and also, inside conversations with other parents or between themselves, and you really don't. I find that there's a lack of transparency with the school board. I don't think that the school board really understands what it feels like to be a parent on the other side of the table and hear all this information and not necessarily know what was said at the last meeting. And again,
Do you have a question?
Yes, I am. I'm getting to it. I'm getting there. Again, I just want to say, and again, just to reiterate, not malicious. I don't believe that at all. But I would like to know what the candidates would do to help increase parent involvement at school board meetings, help to get those numbers up, because as Kevin mentioned, there are very few parents that attend the school board meetings. Only the forums seem to get good attendance. So what would you do to increase transparency of the board and increase parental involvement?
Before you answer, can you just state your name?
Oh, sorry about that. Christina Baker, Middle Road.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Thompson.
Because I'm chomping at the bit to answer that. Thank you for that question. It's probably one of my biggest pet peeves when I have sat in the meetings is, it breaks my heart, the lack of attendance. First and foremost, one of the things I think that I wanted to say earlier that ties in with where I'm going with this is I think we need much better problem resolution. Because so often when you do have parents who attend the meetings, you have parents who are frustrated, they're angry, they're there for a specific purpose and to gain something from it. And it means that they'll take their 3 minutes that they're allowed to speak. It's not a back and forth conversation. It's not something that's collaborative. It's not something where you see any change or results from it, and then people are frustrated and don't come back. So it is not a welcoming environment. I think strongly we should restructure a little bit. I think sometimes when we have situations like that, like for instance, there were 6th grade parents who had an issue that, sort of that happens and then it goes nowhere. That first thing I would really like to do is see almost issuing invitations, asking people, sending emails out. We know everyone's email address. I got them for 9 years of what is going on. Having topics like that, asking people to submit whether they want an email or another forum. I think we should have a lot less conversations at cookouts between school board members and people and more transparency. I think it really should happen in a forum. I think maybe we need to say, are we going to do one Saturday morning a month where we have an open forum, that we have a discussion, where we target it towards parents that have children in certain age groups. So you're there, possibly something near and dear, because to bring back Kevin's point, we had a full house when people came out to speak specifically on the high school. That I think that it should be broken up. I think we should have ones that are more geared towards academics, ones more on involvement, and I think we should have targeted things that are more listening sessions with specific topics around them, and really make sure we're reaching out to the parents of those age groups. So if it's a middle school topic, make sure everyone's invited. We would love to have every member of the community, but really make sure we're reaching that audience in multiple ways and take a different approach.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Burville.
Thank you, Mr.
Moderator. Thank you for the question. So I can share your frustration. It's interesting because it actually comes from two different directions, right? So one is the parents looking inward, and there certainly is also, to a lesser degree, teachers looking up through. So we are very administration driven in our school board meetings. I would, especially around budgeting, it's about direct student services, right? You want to see me spend money? Talk to me about direct student services. Talk to me about textbooks. Talk to me about reading books, things like that. I think we should be bringing our department heads in front of the school board to propose their own budgets, right? Where right now we've got teachers going to department heads, going to the administrators, going to the school board. We should be hearing from our department heads. We should hear directly from those people what they think their priorities are and give that more. But to go more directly to your question about kind of, well, those meetings run that way because the school board chooses to run them that way. And they don't have to run them that way. And you can allow for open discussion of a school board with residents. The one thing that you have to appreciate is when you make it a discussion like that, you're hearing from individual school board members because it takes a majority of the vote to show the will of the board. The board doesn't take questions unless they decide, on the whim that they're going to, and they don't give answers. And that's unfortunate. That lacks a certain amount of accountability for our elected officials. Your constituents should be able to show up to an open public meeting and ask any question they want that doesn't violate privacy laws, right? So there are certain things you can't discuss in an open meeting. I've been to a lot of school board meetings. Those aren't the questions being asked. So to say, well, we're protecting people's privacy by not having the back and forth, no. So you don't want the meetings to run long. So I advocated, this is my 5th time running, right? I said, geez, they only meet 11 times a year, right? Once a month except for in July. They should be meeting twice a month. And they did, they adopted that. But instead of doing more work, they simply, had earlier quitting time. The school board could decide to make the first half an hour of every meeting open discussion if people show up with questions, and have that be an open discussion meeting with the public if they wanted to. I would advocate for that. That's the way it's supposed to be. When I was on the NBC, we took questions. We tried to answer questions. The NBC still does that, right? I guess they're gone. But they still do that. The school board chooses to be that locked down, and I don't like it either, and I would work to change that. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Mr. Reardon.
Sure. So I think just kind of hearing what folks are asking about, I'd want to learn more about the current process, if there are things that can be changed, why, how. I understand, there might be security, privacy, and other sorts of implications on the conversations, so I don't know how that would impact the changing of the format of a meeting. So I'd want to learn more about that before, I guess, committing to something like that. I will share from personal experience that previously I ran on the school board as a vice chair, and we had almost zero parent participation and involvement in school board meetings. And it was a community school, or a cooperative, excuse me. So that was kind of shocking. So I'd be, I guess, interested in learning more about it and potentially exploring something like that.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Good question, and, sorry, whatever frustration you felt, I'm sorry for that, but, I can assure you that as a school board member, I would be accessible to anybody, meetings aside. And this, I can't speak to the specific way and why, the reason that the meetings are run the way they are, but I know, having been a resident of this town as long as I have, that open forums can quickly get sidetracked and lost in the weeds. And people like to drag out details, and a school board meeting isn't necessarily the appropriate forum for where some of those issues could go. And so while you may have had a very specific issue that was appropriate to address then, it's entirely possible that an open forum could just devolve into chaos. You know, we see it happen at our deliberative sessions from time to time. You know, but like I said, as a school board member, I would always be accessible and I would always be there. And I had another thought, but apparently I got lost in
All right, thank you. Ms. Thompson, a quick follow-up.
Can I, a quick follow-up? According to the New Hampshire School
Hang
Board
on.
Association.
Hang on. Go ahead.
No.
Yes, please.
The role of a school board member outside of the meetings, you have no authority. A school board member only has authority as far as having one vote when something comes up to the table. And I understand there's good and bad when you do things in a public forum, but I think to sort of follow up, having a conversation with a school board member outside of a school board meeting is no different than having a conversation with your next door neighbor, because there is no authority in that. And then bringing it to a public forum is so critical because of that. Until something is official, it should be official, it should be transparent. People should really understand the only authority that a person who's on the school board truly has is to vote when something comes up to a vote, to set policy and to vote on that, to set the budget and to vote on that. So that really should be done transparent and in public.
Thank you. Mr. Keller.
Absolutely, yes. I just thought it came back to me, so I just wanted to follow up on that. You know, it's easy to get lost and confused with the school board. But the analogy I wanted to use before I lost my train of thought was, you know, it's very similar to, I think of zoning boards or planning boards, you know, and it's such an emotional board, right? Because our kids are all here, and, you know, there's my kids, right? And I love them, and I'm so vested in the outcome of their education. But at the end of the day, it is a board that is in place to fulfill a very specific function. And similar to how planning board meetings are run, or zoning board meetings, I would encourage you to think about that. And yes, I wish I could have an open forum and stamp my foot and yell and scream. Not that that's what you would do, but I'm just saying if we had an open forum, because, you know, the zoning board or the planning board's not doing what I want them to do as, you know, as a developer. And it's just important to remember that, you know, yes, we're emotionally invested in this outcome, but they're there to perform a function, and we're all working together to vote the best board in that we can, and we need to trust them to serve.
Thank you. Question?
Hi, Tim Griffin, Swamp Road. When we think about the question that's out there about potentially expanding the school, what I'm interested to hear from you guys is what facilities do you feel are lacking in this school? I do quite a bit of volunteering in the school, you know that. I'm here tonight as the technology person from the schools dealing with a family situation. And very often, you know, we're setting up for things at last minute because we're sharing space in the gym and the auditorium, and is it a gym, is it an auditorium, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a little bit of loaded there, as I say that, but wondering outside of just classrooms and bathrooms, as Kevin has said, what other things do you think are lacking in the facility, if at all?
Sure, Mr. Kelly.
So I would look at the recommendations put forth by Ms. Withy in her report that was released on February 10th. You know, we have nurses space that doesn't comply with state regulations. We have, as Kevin's mentioned many times, 4 classrooms in the parking lot. The teacher's break room's been converted to a special ed case manager's office. I don't know where the teachers take their break now. The computer lab is dismantled and converted into space for students needing intervention services. Supply closets have been converted into, my favorite word, offices for staff. And space limitations for special ed services. So I'm not an expert on schools and school designs. I leave that to the administration, the architecture, but Ms. Withy did a pretty good job of outlining, you know, where they're being crunched and crunched hard right now.
Mr. Reardon.
I think to expand on Jeff's point, one of the things that was talked about during the school deliberative session was the possible inclusion of community space. So I don't necessarily know if community space means a auditorium, you know, say dedicated for maybe meetings such as these. But I think definitely weighing those considerations during the exploration of what an addition might look like would be pretty important to helping, I guess, bridge the gap between what we need, which are classrooms and bathrooms, as folks like to say, but also bringing the community together, because we're all in this together.
Thank you. Mr. Verville? Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Thank you for the question. It's an excellent one. I'm up against a black and white card over here, so I really didn't get to flesh out my answer. So, you have to be thinking in advance. To say, well, I have no agenda and I'm not really sure and I'm going to look into it. That's what we've been doing, in my opinion, for 10 years, okay? It's time to do something or get off the pot. So, for me, the something that needs to be done quickly is to add classrooms and bathrooms. It can be done at relatively low cost. I asked it deliberative, and I got a great answer, I think, from Member Heckman. We can add 50% to the footprint of the building going out this way. Right? If you're going to build whatever number of classrooms, whatever number of restrooms that allows you, because what you hear here is all classrooms other than maybe an auditorium. You build that first. Let's get the space for our children done first. Let's get it done first. Let's get it done quickly. When that is designed, it should be designed in a modular way such that it can be added on to easily. So I'm in private industry, right? We build factories, and we build little factories. And we build little factories with 3 blowout walls. You can go out the back, you can go out either side. And as the company grows, we expand the size of the factory so that we can put the required footprint within it. So the architects are told, we want a modular design. Don't build me something where I can't use the 6 acres that's out this way. In my opinion, that's what we need to do. We need to give our teachers and our students some room to breathe. And if you want to get it past, a clean, easy classroom, bathroom space is the easiest sell. And if it's modular for potential expansion, if we want an auditorium, if we want a community, if we want whatever it is we want, I don't think that those extras should be on the first bite of the apple, because I want the space needs met sooner rather than later. And I think it's time you just have to take a hard look. We look at demographic studies, that's the word I was trying to think of earlier, right? We're below our max student population. We all know that, but yet we're overcrowded because needs and the way we do things has changed. Let's address direct student services, the things that impact our kids that are in here for 6 to 8 hours a day first. Let's get that done in a modular design that maybe we can expand later to meet other community needs. That would be my answer to the question.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Thompson?
I get lost after all of that. So the space needs was the heart of your question is how to address the space needs.
The heart of my question is
Or-
outside of bathrooms and classrooms, do you see the safety needs that are lacked?
So I'm going to take a little different approach to the answer of that. I think as a community, we need to take a step back. The people right now suddenly feel like we need to build today, when in fact our student population is lower. That is not to say that it's not going to grow, but I think right now we really should invest in a master plan that will include a demographic study. The demographic study that is currently in the master plan ended in 2020. So we're in a position to say, okay, we did this 11 years ago, they did a demographic study. How correct was that? Did we grow according to what they thought before? How were we on that trajectory? Because we don't want to put on another edition and find in 10 years we're having this argument again. We should be taking an approach that says, how are we going to meet the needs, not just today, but going forward? So what is that master plan going to look at? What is the planning board thinking of? How much development are we going to allow in this town? And then make a decision as a community, not 5 people at a table. I don't necessarily think right now we have the perfect answer to that. It may be, there are some people in the community, and I think it, without pushing it, building a middle school might be a better option. So this school would have plenty of space as it is. Possibly we really need to say, okay, 5 years from now, do we really should we be looking at a middle school with a second gym, with expanded fields? Because if they build, looking ahead, if they were to build the police station right near the Parks and Rec fields, we're gonna need different fields in town. So I think really we should be taking a step back, and that answer should really be driven based on some of the things that are gonna come out of the planning board.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? It's a great opportunity, they're here. All set? Everybody's all set? Okay. All right, thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. Thank you, candidates.